Up from the Gates, a story of divine dealing through Dunkirk by Captain H.E. Beresford Mash. Chapter 7, The Promiser. When I came to the surface, I struck out, away from the ship. I had never tried swimming in oil before. Nor in clothes and heavy boots. It was intolerably slow and hard going. Moreover, I was exhausted and still very dazed from the blast. I had only taken a few quick strokes, about a dozen, when the ship turned completely turtle and, after a moment's pause, dived down forward first. Then an incident happened which quickly brought me out of my daze. I found myself beside another man in the water, a young fellow of about 20. We were the only ones in that particular spot. The bulk of the men seemed to have been thrown into the water at the forward end of the ship, or were carried over as she turned turtle and were trapped on the other side. The fellow near called to me. I discovered he was unable to swim, but he had a lifebelt which was keeping him up. "Can you swim?" he asked me. "A little," I said, "but I'm too done for much." To my amazement, he made me an offer which I shall never forget. He deliberately offered me the lifebelt, and he himself could not swim. That woke me up, put me on my mettle, and then, in a flash, there followed another experience, which I shall never be able to describe adequately. Somehow the whole incident, and not least that fine, unselfish gesture, served to bring flooding back into my soul all the assurance God had given me. All his promise seemed purpose for that very hour, and concentrated in its focus on that point. It seemed as I looked up that for a moment, the smoke-filled sky cleared, the reek of the burning oil receded, even those haunting cries for help from countless drowning men were lost for a moment, and then, in a wonderful way, I was conscious of the utter nearness of Christ. Yes, there in the water, and I have never felt his living presence so near. It seemed as if, in all the confusion and tension of that climax, I was deliberately laid hold of, claimed by a power other than those around, and led into a deep and wonderful fellowship. So he named it, rather than it naming itself as Christ, Messiah, Emmanuel, or some other term that indicates that it's not actually God. I mean, those terms literally make that point. But the army and people going with ships, they should really always require people to be able to know how to swim. The skeptic still laughs, and the careless still ignore these happenings. But men who have had these experiences can never doubt the reality of God. Their faith is built on fact. You cannot take from a man something he himself has known or experienced, and no amount of argument would ever make me feel there was any other explanation of that moment than the amazing nearness of Christ. Neither will the passage of time efface the memory. Now, I would also say that people who live in Florida or certain coastal regions shouldn't graduate high school if they don't know how to swim. Moreover, the skeptic will often try to convince others of the soundness of his view. He will persistently declare his belief that God is a myth. Well, see, they're misusing the word myth. Myth is really supposed to mean that it has meaning and purpose. And literally, true or not, belief in God we see through this book alone that belief definitely has purpose. Even the context of our version of that belief. I would say to my readers, especially to my young readers, that those of us who have tried God, who have experienced the wonder of His presence and power, have found Him true, unquestionably true. We are privileged to be the heralds of a message that rings clear and true and is positive. It is based on fact and has greater claim to your faith than the plausible utterances of the skeptic. Our testimony is of the reality of God. This is the primary purpose to which I made the humble contribution of these pages. I recall the testimony of another who passed through the valley of the shadow in similar circumstances. As he was drowning, he had a realization of the presence of Christ, which he could only describe as filling his whole being with sheer ecstasy. It was as if a veil were drawn from his blinded eyes, and he saw the amazing glory of the one we call Christ. Just then, in that moment of intense rapture, and unknown to the drowning man, a boat caught up with him, and quick hands reached down to him and drew him out of the water, saved. In describing those moments, he says that as he was pulled into the boat, and with returning consciousness, knew that he was saved, there swept over him a great flood of revulsion. As the vision faded, it left a wave of intense disappointment that he had been brought back from death. Oh, where is the dread of the valley if Christ is there? There is glory in the valley of the shadow, the glory of His intense nearness, and in the light of these things we understand the triumph of the cry, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" That's from the calling section of the Bible, right? I have digressed a little and must resume the story. Did I accept the offered lifebelt? It was hardly likely, I replied to the fellow beside me in the water. Never, old chap. You keep it. I don't need it. And I felt I did not. I wouldn't have touched that lifebelt for anything. God was greater than the lifebelt and more sure to me. My soul was so flooded with this assurance that I knew He would bring me through. I turned round in the sea with the thought that there might be something from the wreckage to which I might swim. There was nothing to see, but looking further out to sea, I saw a most unexpected thing, a drifting rowboat. There was no one in it, and oars were hanging over the side. It literally drifted out of the blue. The distance to the boat looked hopeless, and when I told the other fellow I meant to try and reach it, he seemed to doubt the possibility, but as I set out, he asked me to go back for him if ever I got to the boat. I promised I would. A rash promise, and started. I am not a good swimmer, and shall remember that struggle. First, I had to take off my collar and tie as they were choking me, and I wished I could have taken those heavy boots off, but I dared not try. At times I turned on my back to rest and collect a bit of strength, but I had cramp so badly each time that I dared not stop again. Cramps. Sometimes I seemed to get not a bit nearer to my objective, because the boat drifted away at the same pace as I was swimming. Once I turned round and saw my companion had followed a part of the way by paddling himself along in the lifebelt, but we were beyond shouting distance then. I was dead keen on getting to the boat and bringing it back for him, and I had vague hopes of going for some of the others too. There were times when I gave up and stopped. I felt it was utterly impossible to go another inch. The distance seemed too great. the progress so absolutely ineffective. I was beaten, but those words, what words? The words that came to me, clamoring instantly, were the familiar lines from the verses I had always carried in my pocket, and which I had with me even then. Go on, he says to your soul, go on. The writer in America, from whose book these words came, knows now that the words came to me as if straight from the lips of the Lord himself. Their insistence as they beat into my brain was almost vehement, and there could only be one reaction. I must go on. Somehow I did, on and on, across that interminable stretch. I reached the boat. I clung to a rope over the side of the boat, but was far too exhausted to climb in. I waited, feeling vaguely that I should soon regain enough strength to get in. On looking round, however, I saw that a couple of motorboats were picking up men as fast as they could, and one of them was making straight for me. They pulled me abroad. I remember only that I insisted that they turn round and go straight back for the fellow behind me. They turned back and got him. After that, I have no clear recollections, but ultimately we were put on another ship and brought over to England. Just before Dunkirk, week one of the members of my Bible class at home had received a letter from me in France. On reading it, he was so seized with the strong conviction that I was either in danger or threatened by it, that instead of putting the letter on one side, he immediately went and prayed over it. He looked at the text of his calendar for the day and read, "The angel of his presence saved them." He felt he had to write an immediate reply to the letter. Putting in the text from the calendar and believing it would be an inspiration for an hour of danger. Actually, I never received that letter until some time afterwards, along with many others, but had it followed its normal course, it would have reached me immediately before the incidents of which I have just written. I saw in after days how many had been led by different ways to concentrate in prayer for those hours. While I did not receive the message of my friend in time, I was the privileged recipient of the full answer to his prayers and those of many others. God had indeed fulfilled his promise. His hand shall lead you through, clear through. No wave can touch you, no foe can smite, no mightiest sea can drown. All gloriously proved with him. He never faileth, and greatest of all was not the deliverance, but the hallowed fellowship with the promiser.